Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Versus Stars podcast, third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is a fantastic episode because Derek Tyler Attico boards the mothership. You know him as the writer of the Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. Now come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Attico. Thank you so much for coming to the Versus Stars podcast.
Jeff, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, man.
It is absolutely my honor. I loved your book. We'll get into it in a second. Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko is phenomenal. I read it very quickly, much quicker than I thought I was going to, and I look forward to talking with you. But my first question that I always start off with is a question of inspiration. So, what inspired your love for writing, and who your earliest influences?
Oh my gosh. I guess that goes back to Star Wars. My mom took me to see Star Wars, the original, the New Hope, and when I saw it, I wanted to know how a story like that was put together, how it was done, and I started reading everything I could. I was 10 when I saw the original, and so I wanted to know everything that was done, how it was done, how George Lucas put it all together, and I just started reading everything I could about George Lucas and screenwriting, and I read all about his inspirations and Akira Kurosawa, and that led me to Orson Welles and Citizen Kane, and I just started to steep myself in screenwriting and film. And I think that just I caught the bug. I caught the bug from film and writing and screenwriting from there. 6 years later, when I was 16 years old, I wrote my first screenplay, and it was a Star Wars screenplay. I gave it to my English high school English teacher to correct it for grammar and spelling and stuff. Unbeknownst to me, she enters it into a contest, the Writers Guild of America, and they picked 12 out of 12,000 across the country, and mine was one of the 12 that won. And that started me. I was off to the races after that. I started me writing, and I never stopped after that. I've been writing since then, not professionally, but I started that started me writing since I was 10. I've been writing.
Well, you already kind of answered my next question I was going to ask, which was, have you always been a fan of Star Trek? But apparently, you have always been a fan of Star Trek. So that answers itself for itself. And we're saying you're the author of the Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. Once again, truly wonderful book.
Thank you.
Um, so talking Benjamin Sisko, what do you find so compelling about this guy? Because there's so many great captains. We got, Kirk, Picard, Burnham, Pike. You've got just the top
Archer,
of my head,
yeah, yeah,
Archer,
Archer, yeah,
Janeway.
Janeway,
Um,
yeah.
there's quite a bit of some great ones. So why Cisco?
Uh, all of those that we just named, they're all great captains. They're all great characters, right? Um, but Cisco, in my opinion, and I think that we've seen on screen, Cisco is the only one that is the most balanced of all of those characters. He has that life and work balance pretty much figured out. When we first meet him in the first episode, he's already been married, and he's a widower. He has a son, so he has a family.
Hmm.
He's has a really strong foundational a family behind him, and he has something. He has that, and the other captains, these other characters, great individuals, right? Strong foundational characters, but they don't have that. There's something lacking that they don't have that interpersonal relationships. They're all lacking with that. Intimacy. They all have a problem with that, from Kirk to Burnham to Pike. They all have problems with that. But Sisko, he's figured it all out, and that is reflected in the way in his friendships, and it's reflected a lot, I think, in the way he commands. And I think what happens is when we see that on screen, it helps us to gravitate
Hmm.
towards him and like him a lot.
It's kind of interesting that you just kind of said that, and I was thinking back to the other captains. And other than I can't remember the name of the captain from Lower Decks. I remember I interviewed the actress. I can't remember the name of the captain.
Oh,
The Decks.
Freeman.
Freeman. Other
Right.
than Freeman, only Cisco has a kid of any of the captains. It
Right.
serves.
Right. Right, and Freeman has some of that too, where we start to see this is the only in 50 plus years, this is the second captain that we've really seen that has a kid. Kirk had a son, of course, but
Right.
he died really quickly, on screen. But yeah, Captain Freeman, and we see some of that too now. But I think Sisko leaps and bounds above anyone else, and you're right, we start to see that, and it helps us to like this person, I think, just because we see that he has it all put together really well. And
So,
in writing that, it's it for my job and writing the autobiography, it was a little bit of a challenge to write that and to write the genesis of how does all that happen? How does all that
hmm.
start? And how do we get to that balanced individual?
Now, one interesting aspect of going to the idea of having the son, and as you mentioned, like Kirk had it, but he never really kind of like never knew his son until like the very like well, the kid was already a full grown adult at that point, so it's kind of cheating at that point. Um, but with Cisco, every captain has the responsibility of every life on his ship or on his space station, right?
That's right.
But Cisco has a son on that same space station. How does that, you think, impact his decision making?
It's an incredible weight on the man's shoulders because on the one hand, he's a parent, right? And so he has his son, his literal offspring, his blood that he has to care for and protect. But
Hmm.
at the same time, here he is a Starfleet officer, a captain, and commander of the space station, and these are lives that he has to protect, and he can't play favorites with
Yeah.
his son over these other lives. So that's a heck of a balance that he has to weigh every day. We see that, I think it's in the end of season 5, I think, um, when Jake decides to remain on Deep Space Nine, when the Cardassians retake it,
Hmm.
and I think O'Brien is like, well, do we go back for Jake? And he says, no. He's a man now, and I can't turn this ship around and all of our plans for one man. And we get to see the weight that bears down upon Cisco, but he has to do the right thing. And in that regard, he has to take a back seat to being a parent and
Hmm.
and be a captain and a Starfleet officer first. It's incredible. It's incredible to watch that.
And I think a cool thing in your book is that basically you're writing Benjamin Sisko, writing about him, his it's autobiography, but it's you doing the writing, and it's him telling the story from being in the wormhole to Jake at some point after the last episode of Deep Space Nine.
Right,
And one of the things he refers back to is that episode. I can't remember the name of the episode, but I think Jake is 17 years old. He's with Bashir, and they land on that planet where the Klingons are attacking. And
right,
and you
right.
and you talk about that, and I think that's a very interesting way of showing how Cisco had to view Jake as a son, a boy, but he's a man at the same time. You know what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
I think that was a very interesting way to write that and a way to show how those layers exist in Cisco about his boy, which I mean, I don't have a kid myself. I can only imagine what that would be like. You got to take a lot in. He's your
No,
son.
yeah.
He's always the baby. He's your son. Same time though, 17-year-old, he's a man. You know?
You're exactly right. Yeah, that episode is season 4. It's on the tip of my tongue. Um, something northern something to the strong. It's a Bible quote. And it's a great episode where Jake and Bashir are behind enemy lines.
Mhm.
And he in the book, he is talking to Jake as his son, but at this point in the book, Jake is now 21, 21 plus.
Mhm.
And so now, what's beautiful about this book is that, and the way it's framed, is that Benjamin can now talk to his son as a man.
Mm.
So it's also his son, of course, it's his child, his baby, but he can also talk to him in many ways, man to man, and say, hey, these are many things that happened to me in my life, or these are things that I saw that happened to you in your life, and I can just talk to you frankly about
Mm,
them, and we can I can say things to you now as a man that maybe I wouldn't have said to you at 17, 16,
mm.
even 18. But now I can say these things to you, and because I think you need to hear them, even though that I'm not there, these are things you need to hear from me, you know?
Now, putting you on the spot right now. So you do
Sure.
have the adult Cisco talking about his son, as you mentioned, these are things he cannot talk about with his son because he's a man now, and you can talk to him as a man to man as well as man to son.
Right,
And you hit a lot of different points in his life, a lot of difficult things that he's done, going through was it a Wolf 359, going through the creation and the failure of the original attempting the original Defiant.
right.
He does not tell his son about the events of In the Pale Moonlight. Now, is that, as you're envisioning it, something that he's even too embarrassed to tell his son, or not say embarrassed, but too self-conscious about his actions to tell his son about? Or do you think it was something a little too heavy, or just something that you felt was covered so well in the episode you didn't want to cover it?
No, no, no. I actually cover it in the book. Uh, I do cover it because the way I cover it is a little bit tricky, a little bit different because this is the way I thought about it is that this is Ben's opportunity to talk to his son, right? So he's going to do that. He's going to talk to his son and he's going to not necessarily confess, but he is going to express his thoughts and his feelings to his son. At the same time, he's always and will always be a Starfleet officer and a captain. So there are the things that he's not gonna just
Mm,
not gonna say, right? He's not gonna say. So there's a moment in the book without giving away too much, where he's just talking and he's talking about the war, and you start to feel like things are just weighing on Ben as he's talking to Jake, and 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 he says some things to Jake, and those things get redacted, and it's not like he says to Jake, you know, oh, I did this thing, but he says things to Jake that are very personal. Not that he would ever tell Jake, "Oh, I did this thing," but they're very personal. They're very much things that a father would tell a son. And even Jake notes in the redaction in the asterisk for the redaction that there were some things that even though I'm allowing this book to be published, there
mm.
were some things that I think a father should some things that should remain between a father and a son, you know? And we know, we being the reader knows that what Ben is talking about is far is in the pale moonlight because of what he says like in the next paragraph or two. He gives Jake a line, and the line runs something like, you know, there's an old saying, there's an old saying, um, uh,
Well,
if
that's the devil.
right, right,
And
if
then get out before that was get out before the song's over.
right. It's funny because I was trying to think of a way to let the reader know that I'm talking about that episode,
Yeah,
and then it dawned on me that I could use the actual name of the episode, you know, in the pale moonlight, you know. So when you're dancing with the devil, you know, when you're dancing with the devil in the pale moonlight, leave before the music stops, or something that
yeah,
I
yeah.
does, you know. And so then the reader will know, oh, this is what he's talking about. This is what he's feeling in that moment, you know. So that's my way to try and to have Ben talk about those things and both have the reader understand what's going on at the same time.
Now, I used the wrong word when I said embarrassed. I think I meant shame. Said
Yeah,
embarrassed, which I meant
yeah,
differently. In your opinion, looking back on the events of the time of Deep Space Nine, the Dominion War, things of that nature, it is arguable that those events helped to save the Federation.
sure, sure.
Does Am I using the right word, shame, for him, or would it literally be because it is in his own mind a classified thing that he shouldn't be talking about? Because if the Romulans would have completely find out about it, he might literally spark a war between because now they went to the war for the wrong reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
So do you think shame is what he would be feeling right there, or do you think it is duty, do not discuss this thing?
No, I've thought about this a lot, and obviously I thought about it a lot before I wrote that scene. And I would agree with you that it is shame. And I watched that particular episode about 4 or 5 times back to back. Before I wrote,
That's my favorite Star Trek episode.
it's a phenomenal episode. It's the only episode I watched of Deep Space Nine before doing any writing. I watched it like 4 or 5 times back to back, and then I didn't watch any more Deep Space Nine, and then I wrote the whole book.
Mm.
And there's a moment, when he pours himself a drink and he holds it up, here's one for the good guys, but he never takes a drink. He never takes a sip from that drink. And I realized, again, from my film background, for him to take a sip from that drink would mean that as a character, he's okay with it, that
Mm.
he's okay with what he did. But he never takes that drink because he's not okay, because he does have shame, because Garrick was, Garrick was right in many ways. He went to Garrick because Garrick was the person that could do the things that he couldn't do. And maybe not on a conscious level, you can make that argument. On a subconscious level, that's why he went to Garrick. But Garrick is right. And he's upset that he went to Garrick. But in the end, what else was he going to do? If they hadn't done that,
Yeah.
then the Alpha Quadrant would have been lost. So sometimes you do something that may be wrong for the individual, but right for the group. And I think that's where Ben has landed, in his heart and his soul. And
Mm.
he literally took one for the team, where he has in some respects tarnished his own self-respect, and he has some shame about that. But the Alpha Quadrant has been saved. So
Well, once again, there's so many good points in this book, but what it kind of reminds me of, there's a evaluation of Garrick by Sisko.
yes,
And he basically does refer to Garrick, though, as a liar, but the one honest man in some
yes,
way. Because he may be a liar and a killer and all the horrible things you say about him, but he's always honest. The only one who's truly honest always about who he is at any given time. Even
yes,
though he's lying all the time, there's still an honesty underneath all the bullshit.
yes.
And I think that's interesting that he goes to him partly because he's kind of like the devil who will do the thing that you can't do, but he's also the honest man. So, how did you arrive at Cisco's evaluation of Garrick in that part of the book?
That's a really great question. No one has ever asked me that. I wanted it to be a final evaluation and thought and admission of, Ben is telling these things to Jake, but there's a lot going on, in that moment. He's also thinking about how he feels about Garrett as he's talking to Jake, and then this could also, in a lot of ways, this could be construed as a message to Garrett, because Ben is no fool. He knows that he's sending a message to the station, and eventually this is going to get out. I
Yeah.
mean, he's sending it with his command codes. It's obviously at some point it's going to get out. So he knows that on some level this message will get out. So the way I looked at it is that not only is this a message to Jake, so that Jake can understand if Jake ever needs uh, to know the character of these people, to know the character of Garrick. Maybe sometime in the future, Jake will have to count on Garrick, know that he is someone he can trust to a point,
Right,
but
right.
but also to kind of book and close that conversation between Cisco and Garrick, a way for Cisco to tell Garrick, I may not like you. I may not like what you did, but I understand the difference between you and Ducat. I understand that of the two of you, you're the honest man in the room, and you were even honest about the fact that you were always a liar.
Yeah.
And and in that, you're more useful to everyone than Ducat, who lied about everything, even to himself.
Now, a couple things I thought really interesting, and one thing I was thinking of because of these evaluations given to Jake, was this a way of saying if you ever need to do something to like put together, maybe to even help me, these are the people you should be going to put together this mission?
You
Is there
got it.
is there a thought about this
Yeah.
could be a story after that this is happening?
Yes, yes, there we got. Yeah. I did a lot of that in the book. With not just that part, but other parts in the book, just because I'm a writer, man. So
Right, 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 right.
there are threads in the book. There are threads that I put with Tyler Scott. Um, they're just threads that I just felt that, hey, this would be cool, and maybe somewhere down the line I would get an opportunity to pick that up, or maybe someone else, some other Star Trek writer, would say, oh, that's an interesting thread. Let's pick up on that and pull that thread and see where that goes.
And I think one of the most interesting things, because once again, taking it from the perspective of him talking to Garrick through the book, he's giving him advice as well, sort of like you're a good man, sort of. I mean, despite all this crap, realize the person that you are. And the biggest, let's say, I'm trying to think of the best phrase for it, but um, acknowledgement of his goodness is that he does tell his son that he can seek Garrick out. That's a hell
Right,
of a thing to be to tell this murderer, liar, conspirator, I'm going to trust you with my son, potentially my
right,
son's life.
right.
So, I mean, that's a major thing to be telling to Garrett. And how do you think that's particularly to help inform Garrett on how to move forward, or to at least help recognize that he is someone worthy of that?
Yeah, yeah, I thought a lot about that because I thought that's huge, and I thought about it from Cisco's perspective because he's out of the picture, so to speak.
Hmm.
And so from Cisco's perspective, he's like, well, if my son is ever in trouble, who can he go to? And likewise, who would I want to come to my son's aid?
Hmm.
And so this is also a message both ways. It's a message to Jake. It's a message to these people. You are the people I trust. You are the people that are now there in my absence. So you are the ones that can go and do these things. So and those are the ones that he talks about.
And like I said, I like so many aspects of your book, which is why I'm going to discuss quite a lot of details with you on it. But as he mentions to Garrick, about being the one honest man, another, I think, not necessarily obvious decision is that he also credits Quark quite a bit as being, even though he's this greedy Ferengian, he seems all about the Latinum. Deep down, he's really just a Fallon man.
Right,
And once again, on that ship, ignoring Cisco and his son because they are really not a thing in Deep Space Nine. The only other family man on the crypt is Quark,
right,
who has Nog, who has the brother Rom.
right.
Is that also a connection he's trying to make? Being like, once again, trust the family man who is a father, just like I'm the father.
Right, right. Because well, Deep Space Nine was really a lot about families. And it evolved definitely into that. But just in watching the show for so long and in looking at things from Ben's perspective, in that first episode, Emissary, Cisco couldn't have put the screws to Quark the way he did.
Hmm.
If Quark was the typical Ferengi, he would have let Nog rot in jail, right? I
Yeah,
mean, he would have been like, okay, it's not my kid, it's my brother's kid, and maybe I'll try and use some Latin to get him out of jail, but if I can't, I'm out of here.
right, right.
But it was almost like Ben summed up Quark immediately and realized that this man's weakness was family, and I'm going to use that. And he almost intimates that to O'Brien. He's like, there's something I want from
Hmm.
Quark. And he realized that, and we get to see that over 7 years that Quark always comes back to family. And so it's like that line from Shakespeare in The Lady Doeth Protest Too Much. Quark protests a lot, but he always comes back to family. And I think this is Cisco's way of saying, I see through all the rules of acquisition, and I see through all the profit. I see you who you really are, Quark.
Hmm. And like I said, I think it's just phenomenal. And I was interested in hearing, well, I mean, it's you, but Benjamin, um, talk about these characters. Like I said, it's two of my favorite characters on Star Trek. Deep Space Nine and almost all of Star Trek is Quark and Garrick. I love those two characters. They're phenomenal because of their complexity. I've said on another episode before about the show, which is while I love Star Trek a lot, I think some characters and some of the series were made so bland as people that you didn't get to enjoy them as complex characters. I also point to Next Generation. It's kind of like, unfortunately, all those characters were made exactly perfectly moral in all pure
Right,
in
right.
all ways, shape, or forms. But Garrick and Quark are that perfect little complexity, even though they are moral characters. I mean, that also episode I like a lot with Quark is the one with the selling arms in a war. And
Oh,
eventually when you would realize what the death toll is going to be, he's like, you know what? I can't be doing this. The money isn't worth the cost of this, which for a Ferengi, you think doesn't make sense. Ferengis don't view it in that way, but he's definitely something beyond, morally than you would assume from the Ferengis.
exactly.
And once again, I love those complexity of those characters, and I like that Sisko is a good enough judge of character to have seen through those complexities.
Right, right, exactly, exactly. When I was a kid, I remember in high school we would do close readings of works of fiction, and I always made a promise to myself that if I ever wrote a novel, I wanted to do something that could you could do a close reading to. And this is also my first novel,
Yeah.
and so I said, well, I know it's Star Trek, but there's no reason you can't do a close reading with this. And on top of that, I mean the richness of these characters in a lot of ways, I mean, all I'm doing is standing on the shoulders of the writers from Deep Space Nine
Hmm.
and just taking what they've done already and just really looking at it and maybe looking at it from ways that we always haven't thought about, or looking at it from ways that hasn't always been shown to us,
Hmm.
from Ben's perspective, and now giving it to the reader.
Well, talking about close readings. I'm an English teacher, so I do close readings.
There
Uh,
you go.
and one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I'm not sure if it was just in my head this became is a thing or is a thing you were actually thinking about. I'm going to go over it anyway. It's a little longer question, so just kind of bear with me, okay?
Okay.
In reading the book, one of the overarching themes of the book seems to be an examination of how fear can drive our actions. For example, you explained that Cardassians' arrogance is due to a fear of inferiority. For the founders, it's the fear of the solids cause them to subjugate other sentients.
Hmm.
Now, and then you have certain parts where not Picard, sorry, Cisco is dealing
Hmm.
with the bully, and his mother tells him something to throw that punch to the Andorian bully.
Right.
Is part of the book is how Benjamin's response to fear and how it allows him to live in contrast to those enemies he was fighting.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I in 2020, I think 2017 or 2018, I wrote an essay for Star Trek magazine called Deep Space Nine: Fear is the Enemy. And in that essay, I just really started this. It was like really the genesis of a lot of things that were happening in this book. And I just started to realize that a lot of a lot of the real impetus for a lot of the things that happens in Deep Space Nine is not necessarily the founders or the Cardassians. It's actually fear.
Hmm.
The founders, they create the Dominion out of fear,
Yeah.
right? They don't want to be hunted, and they go to the extreme of creating the Dominion. The Cardassians, they had this beautiful artistic culture, and they don't want to ever, and it collapsed. They don't ever want to go back to that. So fear, and then these themes of fear, and so I knew now in writing this, I had an opportunity to go back to that essay and just really bake that into this and to show what I've always believed, that fear is such a powerful destructive force, and how it has shaped a lot of what has happened in through the lens of Deep Space Nine,
Hmm.
um, and allow Ben to speak on that, and then to show different parallels with species, and then I could also just show parallels in Ben's life and how that follows through all the way through childhood to adulthood.
Well, I think you did, like I said, a great job with that. I mean, we have Cisco dealing with the fear as a kid especially with the transporter when he was playing the games
Right,
and he finally got badly injured. Um,
right,
he was immobile, hurt his back. You have the fear of, like I said, the bully, the Andorian, whose mother told him basically to punch in the face. You have the challenge and the threat of Starbase 137 and what those challenges with. Then there's Wolf 359, the Borg, and trying to overcome that and dealing with Picard. I feel like a lot of it has to do with, so, unlike his adversary, Cisco has faced fear. And I'm not gonna say he necessarily didn't blink at all, but was able to come out the other side stronger instead of the others, which seem to have definitely blinked and
Right.
kind of allow that fear to dictate their actions.
Exactly right. And in the book, Ben's first fear is when he's with his grandparents and he's at the lake and he's fear of water, and that's a recurring theme for
Mm,
him, and then when he's at Starbase 137, it's almost a repeat of that, and so I'm trying to show these recurring themes, and someone that has conquered fear, not that they're not a fearful person. They still have to deal with fear, but I think they get to they can it's easier for them to see fear
mm,
and to deal with fear. And if we've seen anything about Benjamin Sisko, is that not that he can't be afraid when things happen, but he handles it differently,
mm,
and I wanted to know where that strength came from. And I think that strength came from him having those instances of having to deal with those moments of fear.
mm. And like I said, and I think it was a great job of, once again, you've seen the character develop over that time. And once you go into fear, being a father, is how does that, I mean, is it a fear of what could happen? Does the fear, how does the fear transform itself for Cisco? Because now he has a son to be afraid of. I mean, not afraid for, but at the same time, he has to know he can't allow himself to the fear, or his son can be in danger.
Right. And I think that's part of the actual beginning of it certainly is the framework of the book in the beginning of the book, because it starts from a certain type of fear, because Ben is saying to Jake, look, I've seen certain events of from the episode we know as The Visitor, and I've seen you go down a road, Jake, where I'm not in your life, and you just become consumed with trying to find me, and I've seen that, and so now I am afraid as your father that you will go down that path,
Hmm.
and I don't want you to go down that path. So, this message is for you. This message is for you to, as a father to a son, to you won't have to go down that path. I can still be, even though I'm not physically there. These words, me embarking my life can be there for you. So that's Ben being, in some ways, being fearful of what could happen to Jake, of
Hmm.
the way Jake could turn out. Because 2021, that's a crucial time in a kid's life. You're at that cusp from childhood to adulthood, and he really wants Jake to make that turn in a positive way. And I think so for me, it was never really the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, if I'm to be really honest. It was a father's message to his son,
Hmm.
and in that message, it becomes the autobiography.
And like there's just so many interesting details in the book from his life that you wrote. Um I mean, his family basically Luddites, they're not anti-technology for the most part. When you, I mean, obviously some of that we know already because his father we know is a chef from the show he had the restaurant.
Right.
So how much research was conducted to make this into the continuity to make this work? Was it just the shows? Were there novelizations and comic books that you had to look to as well? Was there anything that they told you you can't go with his origin? Like, well, don't talk about this, talk about that, or was there anything that you did write where they said, we don't want that in the origin? Like, how did you create a timeline for a character that both has this deep one in the in the fictionary world, and at the same time have enough space to write what you want to write to
That's
make
a
it work?
great question. Well, first of all, CBS and Titan, uh, they gave me carte blanche. They're like, do what you want to do. So I had no restrictions whatsoever. So that was really great. But that was also a huge challenge, of course. And then it was up to me to figure out what I wanted to do. I had to produce an outline, of course, before I got approval to do anything. And I've never been to New Orleans. So what I did was I steeped myself in, I watched some documentaries. I read a book on the history of New Orleans. I watched the HBO show, The Treme, which is really good about what New Orleans is now, you know? And I really, really thought a lot about Joseph Sisko, and I thought a lot about Gene Roddenberry, and and those two individuals, well, one is fictional and one is obviously the great bird of the galaxy. But Joseph Sisko, he doesn't like transporters, he doesn't like replicators. So I said, well, where did that all generate from? Where did that all come from? And so that started to give me the genesis of what I needed. And I said, wow, if I can really get into that, if I can really dig into that, then I can really give an autobiography of Joseph Sisko as well.
Hmm.
And he starts to become not a caricature, but a character of his own.
Hmm.
And I could tell his story. And through telling his story, I could tell the story of African Americans in New Orleans, and then tell the story of New Orleans and Louisiana, and then start to build that out into the 24th century and what's happening with Earth. And so it all just started to blossom. And then thinking about Gene Roddenberry really set up some really beautiful things, but he says World War III has to happen before we turn that corner. We really mess up a lot. And then, we turn the corner and then we start to realize after we literally almost burn it all down, we realize the mistake we've made. And then Zephyr creates warp drive and then the Vulcans come. So that gave me another kind of framework to build within.
Hmm.
And putting all that together is what you see in the book.
And like I said, it is it's terrific how you you weave that all together. There's some aspects, maybe my knowledge Star Trek isn't quite as detail doesn't as deep. You talk about a war with the Zenkathi. I don't
Right.
know of that. Is that where does that occur? That where would I know that from?
That was never really on screen. It was mentioned a few times in Benjamin's. It was mentioned on Deep Space Nine a few times, and I think maybe a little bit. I think we maybe saw the Zenkethi in the animated series. Um, uh, but yeah, it was mentioned basically in Ben's past, but we never really saw anything about it. It
Hmm.
was up to me to figure out where to put that in and where to drop that in. And I think this was a great opportunity um, to just show elements of the Federations and Kathy War, show how that happened, and also to give Ben some just really frontline experience, and to show this individual another layer to put on top of him, which is just to show, because we do know from the show that he really wanted to be an engineer before going to command, and just to show how he pivoted from engineering to command. I
Hmm.
thought it would be really great if you have this person that doesn't really think he is command material, but everyone else around him sees, of course you are, but he doesn't.
Hmm.
So in life, there's a lot of people like that where we all have like this friend, and we can see that this friend may be good at something or not, but the person never sees what is right in front of their face.
Well, there's a great line in your book, spoken by the one of the prophets Sarah to Benjamin.
Right.
I'm gonna read the quote, so let's gonna bear with me.
Sure.
So the quote goes, "Sometimes you need to speak to people in a language they can understand before they can hear you." How does this relate to how and why Benjamin shares story with his son? How does this relate to the message of Star Trek conveying to his audience?
I think that's exactly it right there. Originally in the book, that line is spoken to Ben from his stepmother, right? And she tells him that. And what's interesting is that Ben's stepmother tells him that when Ben is having trouble with a bully, and she's like, "Look, you have to speak to this bully in the language that he can understand."
Hmm.
And then it comes back around where his actual mother tells him the same thing. So it's like both of his mothers are telling him the same thing. and I think that that has stuck with Ben. And if we take that onto the show, then you can say, well, he has done that because didn't he do that when he hit Q? Didn't he do that when he met certain species? Or, he speaks to people in the
Yeah.
language that they can understand.
Right. It's interesting, and I think, like I said, that's going back to the idea of Star Trek itself. I feel like Star Trek gives the message in a way people understand. Once again, it's not, you can't give a message directly sometimes
Right.
because
That's
people
exactly
don't want to hear a message spoken directly to them,
right.
but you can engross them into a story with the message, and they'll kind of like absorb, like take it, like absorb it through like their skin, as it were. That's where
Hmm.
they'll get it from. I kind of feel like it's built for both, in my
Hmm.
opinion.
And that's my job as a writer. I grew up on original series Star Trek, and original series Star Trek was so beautiful in the fact that it entertained, but it gave a message.
Hmm.
And I think I'm always somewhere in there between. I tell people that I really like the ideas and ideals and works of James Baldwin. One of the
Hmm.
mandates of James Baldwin, it says to be a mirror to the society you're working in. But sometimes you can't just be a one-to-one mirror because people aren't gonna want to accept that. You have to
Right.
entertain them and then try and give them a message, like exactly as you said. And so hopefully this book, like Star Trek, does the same thing.
Well, I think it's interesting that you, once again, as a longtime fan of especially the original series, there's another quote I want to use from your book that I think is very interesting that you put in there. Like I want to like explore it a little bit because I think it's more. I think you put it in there more than just to give characterization to the character. I think there's also a deeper idea behind it. It's the character. It's the line from the character. Is it Trilla or Trilla?
Twyla,
Tryla. She says,
right.
I love Starfleet and the Federation more than anything else, and it's exactly for that reason I reserve the right to criticize them perpetually. The Prime Directive is a hypocritical practice used by Starfleet and the Federation when it suits them. Now, that's that's kind of a very rough accusation against Starfleet and the Federation and some of the precepts of Star Trek. Now, can we kind of dive into where that comes from? And I think you're saying something more than just like giving characterization to her. You're saying a little bit something a little bit more deep than that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's a riff off of a James Baldwin quote where basically Baldwin says, I can I can basically talk about America and criticize America because I love America." And even Ben says to Tryla, "Oh, you're paraphrasing James Baldwin." And for Tryla, it meshes with her character because in the first season Next Generation episode Conspiracy, where we meet her character, that's very much in line with who she is.
Hmm.
But she is making the argument in that moment that the Federation seems to do things, and you also understand that she is younger in that moment in the book, and she's making the argument that the Federation seems to do things that seem to be the fall very conveniently for the Federation. And I thought that that was an argument that needed to be made. And if a if a cadet is at Starfleet Academy, then all voices need to be heard.
Hmm.
And there needs to be criticism and critiques of the organization you're in, because if you can't have criticisms and critiques, then no one grows,
Hmm.
and therefore the organization will not grow. And so Tryla's voice is as important as Ben's voice, and so that's why the professor, the admiral that's teaching, he doesn't stifle her, but he says, okay, I want papers on both sides of this argument, because
Right.
that's what I think would happen at the academy. It wouldn't be like, oh, we don't like what we're hearing, so we're going to shut you down. But we want to hear both arguments.
So, from the point of view of Benjamin, I think it's fair to say that as people, we're all a product, not just genetics and family, but a product of every person we run into, interact with through the course of our lives.
Right.
And he had quite a bit of time with Tryla. How does that concept connect to, or how did that permeate into Sisko to some level and help him view the Starfleet and the Federation, maybe not necessarily differently, but let's say multicolored.
That's another great question. Because I did think about that. I thought about the people that he meets in his life in this book and what does he get from them. And I think he definitely picked up from Tryla. Uh, he definitely he definitely was able to see more or see less through rose-colored glasses and speak more of truth to power.
Mm.
Because he really wasn't doing that on when you look at him in the book before that, he's I love the Federation, I love engineering, I love these things. And the only person he really meets in the book up until that point is Tryla. And she's like, yeah, I love the Federation, but they have these problems, man. And this is the person that he falls in love with. So
Right.
there's no way he can't come away with some of that on him. And then when we see him in the episodes Homefront and Paradise Lost, we start to see a man that is questioning authority and
Mm.
questioning truth to power. And I think if you look back at Tryla, you can start to see those connections, hopefully.
So once again, looking at that, look his ability to see the Starfleet as a gray area.
Right.
To go back to my favorite episode, as I mentioned, In the Pale Moonlight, can that be also how he can justify what he does? The idea of Starfleet is gray as well.
Well, absolutely. I think by the time Benjamin Sisko gets to Pale Moonlight in his career, he's already been a veteran. And now not only is he a veteran, but he's been put in charge of not only this war, but literally saving the Alpha Quadrant.
Mm.
It's really on Ben's shoulders now, and it's up to him. And on top of that, he even mentions in the book he was the one that had first contact, really, with the Dominion, with the Jem'Hadar. So even if he wasn't put in charge of it, he personally feels responsible.
Mm.
And he personally feels responsible for these lives that are now lost. And there's so many lives that have been lost now that he doesn't even know the names of the
Mm.
worlds, of the people that are just dying and struggling. And that's all weighing on him. So when he makes that decision in the pale moonlight, it's a lot more than we're even seeing on the screen. He's doing this literally he's saving billions, if not trillions of people to do
Well,
this.
I think the other thing that's kind of interesting about Cisco, once again, going to Pale Moonlight, going to Tryla, which she says about Starfleet, and going a little bit to is it the experience through Wolf 359.
Right,
The he helps with some other Starfleet members, including Shelby, which is a great ad, by the way, a nice little nod to a great Star Trek character from the show, by the way, the actress.
right,
And he helps to develop the first Starfleet ship meant only for war.
right,
Everything else
right,
is a science vessel. This is a ship only meant for war. Which, if you think of the initial precepts behind Starfleet, Discovery, and Federation, that's antithetical to everything that Starfleet stands for.
right, right, right.
Once again, does that understand not only comes from the experience of 359 and lose his wife, but once again, the view of talking, having experience trying to the ability to look at Starfleet without the pure black and white goggles. That's the word.
No, no, absolutely. Also remember in the Pale Moonlight, that plan was approved by the Federation,
Mm.
right? So it wasn't like he just went off on his own. That plan was first approved by the Federation, and then he went forward with Garrett. So, he is culpable, but so is the
Mm.
Federation. To go back to the creation of the Defiant, Ben is in a really dark place, and I put him in a really dark place in the book. After his wife is gone, but then I've also drawn a lot of parallels to death in Ben's life, the death of his grandparents. And when Jennifer dies, that's one death too many for him,
Hmm.
and he put so much into that relationship, and that relationship was so much for him because when he meets Jennifer, she fulfills things that was missing because there are other women that come into and go out of his life that just don't fit right. We see that happening, with Tryla, with Zoe. But when Jennifer comes, it's a fit. The two of them just fit. And when Wolf 359 happens and she's murdered, he's lost and he's angry, just like in many ways, like Picard, we see in First Contact, just wants to hurt these people,
Hmm.
but he manifests it through creating the Defiant, and he just can't. He can't let go. He can't. So he gets authorization in a moment of the Federation or Starfleet's weakness, you could say, or fear. Again, fear. These recurring themes, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I thought a lot about what we were all like and what America was like after 9/11. I mean, these are themes that are very relevant, and the Federation pretty much gives him carte blanche, and it's like, hey, yeah, go ahead, build this warship, go right ahead, and he doesn't want to stop, even when everybody else wants to stop. He's like, no, I'm gonna keep going, because that's what's going on with him.
Yeah, that kind of like when you're saying about how you got permission from Starfleet and we're talking about Prime Directive and everything else, it kind of just occurred to me that the ideas of Star Trek, especially going back to Gene Roddenberry, peaceful, the idea of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, however that the phrase goes.
Right? That's right.
Um, you know, and they go against ideas of greed and money, things of that nature. The one thing that seems to have stayed true in Star Trek from current society, bureaucracy, the bureaucracy is corrupt and crazy and ineffectual because there's so many episodes where it's the Admiralty who, like, you watch Picard, that series, you watch some of these others where they're corrupt, they're somehow they're ignorant in some way. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of fun, like no matter how far in the future in advance we get, those at the top are still jackasses.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a commentary that, you can't bake out those things fully out of people. People are still gonna have those idiosyncrasies, and those things are just gonna be in people. And there are certain base elements, and I think what Deep Space Nine did really well is it really explored the human condition on that frontier, and said, hey, everybody doesn't like the Federation. The Federation is not this pretty shiny thing
Yeah.
that we all may think it is, and and it has all of this power, and it may have these freedoms, but what has it really given up that we don't see to have those freedoms and that power? And I really, really like that. The way Ira Stephen Bear and the writers of Deep Space Nine, the way they set that up, which I think unfolds really well, hopefully really well in the autobiography.
And as we mentioned, like the idea that Section 31 exists and it started on Deep Space Nine with William Sadler's fantastic portrayal of his character. I'm trying to remember what the name of the character was.
Sloan,
Sloan, perfect.
right,
Sloan, and I'm like, once again, not very Rodberian, as it were,
right,
but
right, right,
but when you think about it, 100% realistic for an organization like the Federation or Starfleet.
right. There's a line in the book, which is like most people aren't even going to get it. But when Ben learns that Tryla has left Starfleet, the reason that she gives for leaving is the same line that Sloan gives. So I'll just leave that.
Okay.
I'll just leave that. So
Oh shit! Yeah, we had an Easter egg in the book. I gotta check it.
I got a lot of stuff in this book going on, So, and even Ben's reaction to that is very interesting. What he says right after that. So there's a lot going on in
Well,
this.
you give a lot of fantastic nods. You have a engineer manual from Scotty.
right,
You do a throwback to Michael Burnham in the Klingon War. You have that it's a briefly Geordi shows up briefly,
right.
has some wonderful interactions with Data, shows up. You also got Picard in there as well. You have nods to Kirk, nods to I think you mentioned Archer as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think he gets in there a little bit. You get Pike, and then you and the one. How did you determine like which nods to give? And with the scenes with Data, was that how did you was that already known that there was them? So he was at the same ship at the same time, or is that
Yeah.
just something you threw in there? And how did you think about why that was an essential connection to make?
Yeah, no, it's risky because you don't want to do too much. You don't want to give too many nods or just too much. But every time I did it, it just felt really organic, and it felt like it just made a lot of sense. And the one with Data, I just like the character. I think Data's a really cool character. And what's really interesting about writing Data is that Data at that point is different than Data, say, third or fourth season of Next Gen, or Data by the time we get the first, so he's different. And I thought it would be a really great moment because whenever someone meets Data, they're just so flummoxed and just so, oh, you're an android, oh, you're an android, and it almost becomes a stereotype. It's like, oh, you're an android, and I thought, wouldn't it be really great if that someone's like, oh yeah, you're an android, and what's the big deal? We've never really seen that. We've never really seen that at all in Star Trek, which in the 24th century, with AI and with all the artificial intelligence that Kirk met, it shouldn't be that big of a deal,
Hmm.
and with knowing that Data's been in Starfleet for like 16, 20 years, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. People shouldn't be wanting to like poke him and prod him. And so Data actually enjoys that someone is like, oh yeah, yeah, not a big deal.
Oh, by the way, April's the name.
April,
April.
Robert April. Oh my God. Why is that such a hard thing? Captain Robert April, first captain of the Enterprise, now Admiral Robert April. Oh my God.
So there's another great line and kind of and concept you brought up in the book, and I want to hit on it as well. You write that the prophets, well, you write as Benjamin Sisko writing it. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah,
Listeners get what I'm saying. Anyways, so in the book, it says the prophets can seem detached, even cavalier when it comes to their power. Then other times, in their own way, they appear to have a deep understanding and even love for Bajor. Now, that can be read in many different ways, from the fictional interpretation of the characters that characterizes these gods, prophets, in a very interesting way, especially because they're non-linear.
right,
Or it can be viewed from a point of view of the writers of Deep Space Nine, determining sort of like I call the Superman problem. They're all these all powerful characters. You can't have them involved all the time, or you lose the plot. At the same time, sometimes you want them in the story. So you have a problem of when to use them, when not to use them. But as a writer thinking about them as a character in that universe, not having to live with these and understand these things, you have the idea of being sometimes attached, sometimes love.
right.
So how did you approach that concept? Do you think it was directly just the writers wanting to use them as a as a crutch when they want them, or did you view it as this is something really stated about what a all-powerful being would be like in this world?
Yeah, I took a lot of my cues from the writers of Deep Space Nine, and I took a lot of my cues from the first episode, Emissary, which is just a beautiful episode, beautifully done. And when the wormhole prophets or wormhole aliens, when they show up, it's not always like a just to solve a problem, or to resolve a storyline. Um, Sometimes it's to deepen the mystery. Um, and the challenge I had with this was when and how to bring them into the story. And then how do I make that feel not only to Ben, but then to the reader, you know? So I made the decision to use them and use them sparingly, of course, because I think I wanted it to reflect, I wanted the autobiography in many ways to reflect the 7 years of the show. So they are, I don't know how many episodes, but they're used really sparingly over 7 years. They're used sparingly in this book. They're three times we see them in this book, and those three times you can, if you read them, um, just those three instances, that tells a story. And if you read it in the way it's presented linearly, that also tells a story. And I thought, and I thought that would be indicative in many ways of, if you look at every episode where the prophets are in, that tells a story in itself. Or if you watch Deep Space Nine all the way through, that tells a story in itself. If that answers your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When thinking about as well as Sisko, right? At the moment he's writing this book, he's with the prophets right now. He's already
Right.
beginning to experience what it is to live on some level their non-linear existence and um their consciousness beyond what we have an understanding of, especially as they're powerful beings who don't always view our needs and existence as something that is not only neither understandable nor necessarily always the most important thing at any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you're thinking about this going, him sending this message from that point of view, this is obviously off after Deep Space Nine, the last episode. How did you envision Sisko has been changed by the experience in the wormhole? And when you wrote his response to his son, and because sometimes he gives pointers and advice to his son, it's written now not from necessarily the Sisko of the last episode, but the Sisko who's now been there.
Right, right. Well, there's a lot of things going on um, at one time. See, because from Ben's perspective, he's just gotten there, right? So the last episode of the show, What You Leave Behind, we saw him go into the wormhole, and then we see him speak to Cassidy, right? And he
Mm.
never really speaks to Jake. Um, and so, there's that last shot of Jake, looking for his father. But in the autobiography, from Ben's perspective, he just gets there and he hasn't spoken to Cassidy yet from Ben's perspective. So the first thing he does before he speaks to Cassidy is he wants to speak to his son. But because this is new to him, even though he's been in the wormhole before, being this kind of like permanence is new to him. He sends this message, but it doesn't get there till a year later.
Mm.
So what I'm trying to show the reader is that he's still trying to figure stuff out. It's a lot of things are it's new to him. I'm not trying to hit the reader over the head with it, but here's a man that he's been here before, but things are still new. It's still all unfolding for him,
Mm.
and even when his I guess you could say his vistas change abruptly around him, he's not even aware of how is this happening. He's not fully in control, but as the book progresses, he becomes more comfortable with what's happening, and so you do see a progression as he's talking to Jake and as things are happening. So I'm trying to show is that when the book first starts and when the message first starts, it's a little weird to wrap your head around. Even though the message is sent at one time, things are happening in the entirety of that message where he's
Mm.
becoming more comfortable with his time in that non-linear place.
Now, this I mentioned it a little earlier. You gave a nod to Captain Burnham and Star Trek Discovery. And
Right.
what I liked about that a lot is that I feel like in the fandom there seems to be some argument whether or not Discovery and Picard and Strange New Worlds exist within the true continuity of the pre-Discovery world.
Right.
And I think by giving that, and I think it's only one sentence long, but giving that one sentence nod, you permanently fixed Discovery into Deep Space Nine's world and saying, no, these are directly connected. Even though Deep Space Nine never shows up in Picard, there's I don't there's that Lower Decks it does,
It does, yeah.
but
Lower Decks does.
for the most part, they're not that. But by making that sentence, you've permanently included them in the Deep Space Nine universe and said Discovery is Star Trek, 100%.
Yes.
How, as someone who loves Discovery and all the new they call the new Trek, how important was it to make sure you gave the nod to Discovery and said, say what you want, this is in fact part of Star Trek?
That's a really great point, really great question. It was very important because I know it's all Trek. I've had this discussion with other Star Trek writers of the novels, and we've talked about it. We know it's all Star Trek. It all fits for us. We all acknowledge it, and it's all Star Trek. It's all Star Trek. So I just wanted to show ways where it could all fit where and it just fits seamlessly. It's all Star Trek, you know. And even in Picard, when they go to that world in season one, free world, free zone, there's a quarks on that planet, you know, to when they go to try and find matter, there's a quarks on there. And I think Cassidy Yates has a place there too. So you know, there is a meshing starting to happen more, I think now, with this, and we've certainly seen it in season three of Picard with the Dominion and the Changelings and all that. So you know, the more the merrier. I think a homogenization of all of Star Trek is a beautiful thing, and you can't go wrong because it's all these series are all Star Trek. There's all Star
Hmm.
Trek.
Like I said, I did appreciate that. And like I said, for the listeners who have not read the book yet, go do it. The Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko is phenomenal. And like I said, like I said, I really meant it. It was a pleasure to read it. Sometimes I'll have to do reading for my interview, and it's a slog. This flew. So what's next for you?
Oh wow. Well, I'm doing some of my own things. I'm doing some stuff I can't talk about, of course. And I'm plotting out and working on some of my own stuff. Working on a comic book of my own, and some other things. I would love to continue working in the Star Trek universe. We'll have to see what happens next year. Um, but I guess you just have to stay tuned and see what's around the corner for me.
Well, whatever you do, come back on the show. You're welcome anytime you want.
Jeff, this was a great conversation, man.
Thank you
I
so
really
much.
had a lot of fun.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Thank you. And you asked questions that have not been asked, probably because, like you said, you know, being a English teacher, and doing that deep dive. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
I appreciate having a book that's worthy of a deep dive because so like I said, it could have been this could have easily have felt like a very commercial thing that someone was told to pump out a autobiography and they just kind of threw it out there. This felt like something that was had depth to it,
Thank you.
and you could literally read it and study it, and it works as a beautiful character arc of this individual. So thank you for allowing that, and that's why it was worth having some good questions. So thank you.
Thank you, man. That's great. I really appreciate that. Thank you
No
so much.
problem. Have a
Thank you. You too.